This is a 2003 Chevy half-ton pickup. It's an extended cab. And complaint was noise in the front end. And raising it up, the wheel bearing's pretty rough. Steering sloppy. So I'm going to change the wheel bearing in it. I took some of the lug nuts loose. There's 3 more still on it. Zip off the plastic lug nuts caps, hold the hub cover on. Just loosen all of 6 of them up. Pull this off. And they're 22mm lug nuts. Take all 6 of those off. I've got it jacked up, sitting on a jack stand. The wheel's off the ground a couple inches. And once you get the wheel off, might as well have a look at the ball joints on it. I'll stick a bar. I've got the jack stand holding it about right height, so it's like it would be going down the road. Push down on the bar and see if it's got any movement in that ball joint. That seems right that way. Turn the bar underneath of it, get it in that box in the frame, and lift up on it, see if there's any upwards. And I'm having to give to it. And down here on the ball joint, lower ball joint, and lift up between the arm and the spindle, see if there's any movement there. And you can just about guarantee that this axle seal will be leaking. That can be changed anytime. And push in and out on the caliper or the spindle. Make sure the tie rod end is not flopping around on either end. Seems alright. Somebody's better put a little grease to it. And this sure is a floppy wheel bearing. I'm going to go ahead and take a screwdriver and get it in this seam. Start chipping away at this dust cover. Pop it open. Just kind of have to get in it and work around half of it, just tapping it till it starts to dent in, and then move on. It'll start coming loose. I use a pretty skinny screwdriver to get the seam broke open. You can progress into heavier screwdrivers, it opens up. This truck's got 117,000 miles. The original retainers for the rotor, when you take the wheel off to help hold the rotor back, keep dirt from falling behind it, still on it. It's moving right along. And it'll just fall off. And it doesn't matter what you do to the studs, the new wheel bearing's gonna have new studs in it, so that one I want to target is this axle nut while the caliper's still on it. Stick a punch down in the caliper and hold the rotor while I break this nut loose. I'll be using an 1 3/8 socket on it. It's about a 34 6mm, I guess. And I'll stick a punch down the rotor, let the caliper catch it. And I can impact it off because the wheel bearing shot in the way. And there'll be a washer in there, and you need to retrieve it, recycle it. Be sure when you're prying down you don't catch your ABS wire if you're checking the ball joints. Yeah, once the washer's out, just see if the axle's loose. You won't have to fool with it. Just if it's stuck, stick a bolt, punch, whatever in the middle, and take a hammer and just dislodge it so it moves back some. Not enough to tear anything up, but just get it moving. It'll be easier when the wheel bearing starts popping off. I'm going to go ahead and finish unfastening this ABS wire from the truck. The new bearing comes with it. I'll just lift up on a latch on top and pull it apart. And it's got a hold down clip. It stayed on the truck when I pick it out. And this one does too. Put up a little bit of fight. Some diagonals under it or something. Needle nose to pry it up. I picked up a high-end premium wheel bearing for it. So it comes with the ABS. And the high-end ones come with hardware to reinstall it with. Not absolutely necessary, but handy. 3 wheel bearing bolts, looks like brake caliper bolts, and torque bit screw in there. But only was getting the brake caliper off. I'll be turning the steering wheel all the way to the left, get access to the caliper bolts from behind. And excellent time to inspect the brake linings for wear. These are in good shape so far. Rotor's not ground down too much. I'm going to take a pair of tin snips and get these retainers off. You can try to unscrew them off there and reuse them if you want. Buy new ones. Whatever. They're not necessary. 2 of them on this one. If it has them still on it. I've elected to take this 10mm bolt loose on this brake hose / ABS hanger to give the brake hose. I'm going to pick the whole contraption off of there. Give the brake hose a little more movement. It was stuck down from this dowel, and whack it with a hammer, it broke loose in. Free and clear to navigate. Stick him right back in there. And get in this caliper hole right in the center of the rotor and pry the caliper open just a little bit so the brake pads will let go of the rotor when it's lifted off there. And go back on easy enough. The hanger, there's torque bits holding the caliper on, and there's 18mm holding the caliper hanger, which covers the rotor, and it has to come off, so I just take it all off at once. Depending on how hard these 18s are in there. That wasn't bad. This is kind of heavy, so keep hold of it, both loose with your toes. I'm going to lift it off the rotor and set it up here on the upper control arm. might tie it off on something. You might check your brake lines too while you're poking around under here. The caliper and hanger assemblies up on top of the upper control arm. And some nice heavy duty pads. They're chamfered on the edges to keep them from squeaking or vibrating, slow it down some. And sometimes they want to fall out of the track, you just stick them back in there. And the rotor's ready to come off. Fortunately, this one's loose. I'm gonna have to work on it to get it off of there. And you want to take a wire brush and knock any loose stuff off around in this shallow area and the inner cooling fins. You don't want that falling between this surface and the new wheel bearing flange. I'll knock a little bit of it off. Now these are some jewels. I got new bolts, so normally I might wire brush these ends and maybe hit them some penetrating oil or something. But I'm getting all new stuff, so just kind of lift up and down on your drive shaft. Make sure it's not totally popping around. And there's 3 15mm in a triangle fashion. One here, one there, and one in the same spot on the other side. And I'll zip those out of there. Then go to work on this sucker with a sledgehammer. And break his seam loose here. I've got the lower bolt loose. Kind of running into the boot. Pushing on the drive shaft sometimes and get it out of there. I'm going to turn the steering wheel back all the way to the right so I can get a better look at this, maybe a better shot at this one on top. I put a ball joint stud right in the way. And I'll work on the front bolt too. I've come around to the front, put an impact on it with a short wobbler extension. It doesn't really matter if the bolts come out right now. Now this top jewel. Might use 3/8 drive in there to get at that one. With a 15mm socket on it. Short extension. Just be sure not to move around on this boot and damage it. I used a short 15mm socket with extension to get under that ball joint. Just be sure not to damage the boot cranking on it. They do torque to 130 plus foot-pounds. All 3 wheel bearing bolts are loose. And now the wheel bearing's kind of stuck in there, so I hit a few times with a hammer. You don't want to damage this back shield. And pay attention, it has a hole in it to accommodate the ABS sensor when it's positioned back into place. So now I'll probably just knock a stud out and use a nut and bolt against the spindle to drive the wheel bearing out. You do it at 2 places, I guess. Or you can continue to beat on it. It might go. I sprayed a little penetrating oil around it. Yeah, we'll see. Looks like a little persistence with the hammer is getting a gap opened up in it, so I'll just keep working on it with the hammer. I went ahead and took a hammer and knocked the stud out, but this is working, so I can live with that. It's take a little more time to do it. A little persistent beating got it loosened up. Once you get it moving, it's over. Just kind of take your thumb and push on the axle while you're pulling that assembly back. It should walk on through it. Just remember your dust shields to the front and then the tie rod in. And remember the direction that's on there. It's got little flat grippers to catch the wheel bearing, bent and round on the edges, and on the back side it don't. Now that the axle's free and clear to navigate, remove the bolts. Just be sure to stick the new ones in there before installing the wheel bearing. That's a jewel. I'll have to knock it on through. But all this needs scraped out. That's where the wheel bearing's set, and you can put some grease in there if you want. All that gristle buildup needs cleaned out, but not remove any of the metal that the wheel bearing's set in, or as little as possible to get it clean. Make sure you get the top. And I've got the hole cleaned out. Put a layer of grease on it. Put a thin layer of grease on the axle spline. It wasn't really stuck in there, but who knows what it'll do on this aftermarket wheel bearing. Make sure the bearing seat is flat, relatively rust free. Doesn't need to be any grease on the flat part. And insert your new bolts if you got them, or leave the old ones in there if you got those, while the axle's still flopping around. And I want to transfer this splash shield, clean any rust debris off of it so that the bearing will sit flat on it, and install it on the new bearing. With the ABS wire sticking through the slot provided for it. I take the flat washer and put on the head of that with a grinder, and that works well for getting past the excess on that ball joint. All three new bolts are in. The back plate's clean and stuck on the new wheel bearing. There's no grease on these threads. There's no grease or Loctite on these threads. The ABS unit was pointing forward slightly. The shield's on it for relief for the ABS wire, and the top triangular bolts at the top of the wheel bearing. And just start threading the bolts in it. If you got it lined up pretty good. Yeah, lay the ABS wire up out of the way. The wheel bearing will have to be held flat for all the bolts to start. But it's looking pretty good. Better than it was. That one was really done. I think all the balls just fell out of it or something. I mostly worked on the top bolt on this wheel bearing first, and let it pull it down to it, so keep the head up against the spindle to keep it out of the axle boot. And the other ones, I'm snugging them all down to about 60 to 80 foot-pounds. all three of them, and then the final torque on them will be 135 foot-pounds for all three of them. I got the front one now. Turn the steering wheel to the left. It gives you a good shot at the top one and the bottom one. The 3/8 drive does take the 135 pounds, alright. Just like I say, don't hit your boot, tear it up. Went around the inside of the rotor with a drill brush, screwdriver, scraped any high places of rust off. If you're inclined to, you can put a dab of grease in the center here, right in this, so the rotor don't get galled onto the hub later. But the longer rotors last, it won't be on there another year anyway. So, degrease any greasy spots you get on the rotor surface. And I'm going to slide it on there without jangling it around and knocking the rust out of these fins or anything. And I'll install a lug nut to hold the rotor flat against it. Make sure your new wheel bearings gristle free, sand, whatever contaminants. I'm going to be going with the original caliper hanger bolts. I know they're proven. They're just a tad meatier anyway. They're in good shape. There's still factory Loctite on them. Not that it really needs it, but I'm sure they put it on there to cover themselves. I'll loosen this 10mm bolt out. Set it up here on the control arm. And I'm going to hold the pads apart in there and lower it down on to the rotor. And start feeding those 18mm headed caliper hanger bolts back in. These caliper hanger bolts, the 18mm, tighten to 130 foot-pounds. And if you happen to take these Torx bits, they're 100 foot-pounds. And I'll put this bracket back down. And snug the bolt down pretty good. Torque isn't really critical on it, as long as you don't break the bolt off. And I'll make sure that the brake hose doesn't have a twist in it from the caliper being put on and turned and installed. It wouldn't be a good thing. It should be a smooth transition along the control arm, and just a slight twist in it here, but that's fixed with the spindle, so it always stays that way and doesn't get worse when you turn the steering wheel. Go ahead and route the ABS cable back the way it came off. Which it had a lock here. It's best to save the old ones. Sometimes these aftermarket doodads they won't snap in there and hold very good, and you don't want that flopping around next to your tire. After the piece was kind of broke off down there, I just ran a drill bit down there and cleaned it out a little bit. It still might put up a fight getting down in there. There's one here, one there, and then one up, hole up here past the shock mount for it to plug into. You might check and make sure the resistance is good on the ABS sensor before you put it back in. Had them open before. Alright, the ABS cable is routed appropriately. If this gives you trouble, like I say, I run a drill bit through there and then line that, look visually through the hole and make sure it's clean, and then still didn't want to go down in there. Kind of got a quarter of it in there, just took a hammer and drove it down in there, and it went. So it snapped in there and snapped in up under there and plugged in, so the ABS should be fine. Make sure it's got a good bite there. A little floppy, but whatever. Okay, the calipers, hanger, and bolts are tight. The wheel bearing bolts are tight. Still got the axle nut. Now's an opportunity to go and pump the brake pedal and make sure the brakes close up. And it's got brakes for when it started up putting gear. And you can also use the brakes to hold the rotor from turning while you're tightening the nut, or stick a punch in to the rotor fins and hold it. This nut will be tightened down to 178 foot-pounds. Originally, I guess it's like 173 or something, and they updated the torque spec on it. Supposed to use a new nut, but I'm reusing this one. It's dragging pretty good, so it should stay on there without any trouble. Just don't over tighten it. It could damage the bearing long term. Don't use an impact on it either. That could damage the bearing, and has a fairly good probability of doing it from the impact action. And yes, I have a big boy here that'll tighten it down. And just like that, it's done. And the brake pedal's up. Take the slug nut off of the rotor now. And the ABS wire is routed. Bolts are in the wheel bearing and all torques and specs. Caliper hangers tightened down to specs. Hose in and pinched. Check the ball joints. Axle nuts tight. And I did notice the idler arm's getting a little weak in it. When you push on the tie rod, I push on the wheel to the tie rod, the drag link's giving a little bit, so drag link's getting a little wear in it, and a little wear in the idler arm. That's not critical yet, but it'll have to be changed eventually. But this outside one's good, and the inside one's good as far as the tie rod ends. And the ball joints didn't have any slack in them, so I think it'll work. I'll put the wheel on, put this dust cover on. It just pretty much tap it on there and not cave the center in. If you want to get it on there without denting this, take the hammer and screwdriver and tap it around its perimeter against that band right there. That'll keep from caving it in here. It won't necessarily, but it could. Not that it'll really affect anything other than the looks of it. But the lug nut's tightened down to 140 foot-pounds. Just make sure everything's out of clearance from the rim and tacked down. Like I say, if there's a problem with these, you can always zip tie it down. Looks like everything's going to stay fastened down until the next time. There's been an opportunity to put brake pads on if you need it now. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to have an alignment done after this, offhand. And once the lug nuts are down, put the center cap back on there. And just hand tighten the plastic caps down until they start locking. You feel like bumps. Just kind of load them down a little bit. Nothing super hard, or you'll strip them. Strip kind of easy. And just go over them a few times until they're all down. And take it off the jack stand, let the jack down. Make sure you got a brake pedal and take it for a little test drive, see how it does. The wheel's not flopping around now. I ought to straighten it up a little bit.